Good evening. I call the November 16th, 2021 regular City Council meeting to order. I now invite you to recite the Pledge of Allegiance with me. Please unmute your microphones and turn off your video while we display the banner. I'll give everyone a moment to do that. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to
the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge the remote meeting format. Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings is still in effect. Therefore, this meeting will be held entirely remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing or verbally. Sign-up sheets were provided by the city clerk's office via link from the agenda. At this point, we'll take a moment to take roll call of the council members by position number. Please say here when the city clerk calls your name.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Here.
Councilmember Thompson.
Here.
Councilmember McCullough. Councilmember McNeil.
Here.
Mayor Olson.
Here.
Councilmember Dorr.
Here.
Councilmember Agnew.
Here.
All present with the exception of Councilmember McCullough.
Thank you. First item we have is meeting agenda approval. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Yeah, I would like to pull AB 21170.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. Next item I'm going to have is public engagement opportunities. All right, we have the grand opening of the Pop Shops on Main. The community is invited to attend the grand opening of Pop Shops on Main, taking place this Thursday, November 18th at 8 p.m. Attendees will be the first to step foot inside of Bothell's 4 newest downtown boutiques. Learn more at bothellwa.gov/popshops. And then we have the Meet the Candidates virtual forum. Community members are invited to join us virtually on November 29th at 6 p.m. to meet the top and final candidates for Bothell City Manager. Attendees will hear from candidates directly and will have the opportunity to provide feedback by filling out an online survey. Learn more at bothellwa.gov/meetthecandidates. And Native American Heritage Month. November marks Native American Heritage Month, a time to celebrate and recognize the cultures, accomplishments, and contributions of Native Americans and Alaska Natives. And with that, we have a proclamation for National Native American Heritage Month. Were we going to bring it up or should I just read it?
Give me just a minute. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Mayor, if you want to start reading it, I'll get it pulled up.
Can do. All right, we have Native American Heritage Month. Whereas Native American Heritage Month is observed by acknowledging the contributions of Native Americans long before the formation of the United States, which we recognize as inextricably woven into the history of this country. And whereas Native American Awareness Week began in 1976 and recognition was expanded by President George H.W. Bush in August 1990, designating the month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month. And whereas all Indigenous people are respected and celebrated as part of Bothell's history, land that was first inhabited by the Willow people, who were members of a larger group called the People of the Lake and the Duwamish tribe. And whereas in celebrating the traditions, cultures, and accomplishments of Native Americans, we also acknowledge our nation's history of colonialism that has inflicted discrimination, deprivation, and genocide upon Indigenous people. And whereas we are aware of the historical importance of local and national tribes and the way Native Americans continue to enrich our heritage and add to all aspects of our society by sharing their customs and traditions. And whereas we honor our Native people, their ancestral homes, their religion, and recognize their contributions historically, today, and in the future of our community. Now, therefore, I, Liam Olson, do hereby proclaim the month of November as Native American Heritage Month in the city of Bothell, a time to celebrate the rich cultures of Indigenous people, honor their sacrifices, acknowledge the unique challenges Native Americans face historically and present, and recognize their continued significance in our community. Our next item we have is a presentation for Snohomish County proposed growth targets. I believe we'll have our Community Development Director, Michael Kattermann.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And I was in the midst of coming down the hall, so I'm assuming you finished the introduction and I should just go ahead and start. Is that?
Go for it.
Okay, thank you. And I want to make sure Nathen Lamb is also here. He is. So we are ready to go. Thank you. So Nathen, if you could please share your screen. We have a brief presentation for the council this evening. Good evening, council members. Very happy to come before you this evening and share with you some information about the growth targets, the process, and the status of the growth targets for Snohomish County and the work that's been done there. So I'll be doing a short part of the presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to Senior Planner Nathen Lamb, who's going to talk more about the numbers themselves. But just to give you a little bit of background, the way that this works in both King and Snohomish counties is that the Office of Financial Management from the state develops population projections for the entire state and for each county within the state. And they go out 10, 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. And those population projections are then given to the counties, and the counties are directed to work with the cities to allocate that growth, that projected growth, to each of the jurisdictions. We're guided by the Vision 2050 plan that was adopted. It's the regional plan that was adopted through the Puget Sound Regional Council. And that plan actually sets up different types of jurisdictions in terms of the amount of growth that's expected and the role that they play in the region. So there are, there are metro cities. We have 5 metro cities in the Fort County region: Seattle, Bellevue, Bremerton, Tacoma, and Everett. Then there are core cities, which are also expected to take a significant amount of growth. And we are one of the core cities. There are 11 core cities in King County, and there are 2 core cities in Snohomish County. And that's important. And Nathen will talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So each of the counties works with their cities. So in our case, we work with both King and Snohomish counties to work on the allocation of population that goes to those core cities. What the Vision 2050 calls for is there's a significant amount of that population growth, 28% of it, that is allocated to core cities in general. And then the counties work to allocate that among their core cities. and then 35% of employment growth. The employment forecasts come from the Puget Sound Regional Council. So there's a macroeconomic model, and they look at the 4-county region as they're developing those numbers. And we are expected to determine through our comprehensive plan update process how we're going to accommodate those growth targets. We don't necessarily reach those targets. We may fall short or we may exceed them, but in any case, we have to plan for that amount of growth and to demonstrate how we can accommodate that in terms of our land use capacity, our housing development, our utilities and other infrastructure, the transportation system, and a number of other elements that are included in the comprehensive plan. So all of that to say, as a core city, because of Canyon Park being designated as a regional growth center, we take a significant share of that growth in Bothell. Our share in each of those counties is proportional to the amount of population that we have in each of those counties. So we're not treated as they don't include all of the Snohomish County population, for example, in the King County allocation, likewise in Snohomish County. So we have to combine them to look at our total. And Nathen is going to talk about that. So with that, Nathen, I will turn that over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Nice to see you again. So yeah, I'll just pick up where Director Kattermann has left off and provide a little bit of review, I think, since we last visited you in April about buildable lands reports and growth targets. And then also to provide, of course, the update for the Snohomish County updates for the growth targets, which we are getting ready to officially adopt soon. And we'll get into that towards the end here. But you'll recall back in April, we discussed the buildable lands reports that both counties were working on to satisfy what's known as the buildable lands statute as part of the Growth Management Act. And what they did was took a benchmark for the capacity for development out to 2035 for all jurisdictions in the counties. And that gave us a snapshot of sort of how much growth we could take on until we're at capacity. And so both counties really more or less have a similar methodology and process for their efforts in continuing and sort of piggybacking off the buildable lands efforts to get to the growth targets. And basically what each county has done is each one has whether it's the planning advisory committee for Snohomish County and the Snohomish County Steering Committee or the interjurisdictional team for King County. They work together collaboratively with representatives from the individual jurisdictions, and then we break out into caucuses and subcommittees working with other jurisdictions within our regional geography. Okay, and so that's where the negotiation sort of happens, and where we deliberate on the analysis that we're doing and applying data factors to make sure jurisdictions are being weighted and to make sure our process makes sense for distributing proportionally, like Director Kattermann mentioned, the growth to at the individual jurisdictional level. So anyway, that's some background information for the process. These numbers should be review. We've broken these numbers down into a couple tables that we think are helpful for conceptualizing capacity versus growth. So the first one up top here just is simply that capacity versus growth. We have the buildable lands report capacity numbers on the top row, and then we have our 2044 targets that have been set on the middle row. And then what we want to focus on is those deficits and surplus numbers on the third row there. And so as you can see, we've actually got a surplus. When we take the difference of those numbers, we've got a surplus for residential housing units that we can accommodate to 2044 and then some. As compared to jobs, we have a very slight deficit for where we're going to have to make provisions and adjustments and absorb a little bit more jobs than we have capacity for. Okay, and then on the bottom table here, we thought it would be helpful to see what that looks like total. So we take the 2044 targets that we just looked at above, and we add that to our existing housing units and jobs, and that gives us a number that we can see where we should be at by 2044. So what that looks like for King County, on the King County side is 17,526 housing units and 26,000 roughly jobs for King County. Okay, so now getting into Snohomish County, these bar charts were produced by the Snohomish County Planning and Development Services team. It's another way to look at the deficits and surpluses that we were just looking at with King County. And so if you start at the bottom here on the left graph, this is just capacity growth again to 2044 versus what we have capacity for. You'll see the regional geographies on the bottom. The metro city, there's only one metro city on the Snohomish County side, that's Everett. And Director Kattermann mentioned we've got more core cities in King County, and in Snohomish County, it's just us and Linwood. So we're the only ones that split that growth, and that looks a little bit different than King County. And then you have HCT communities and so on. So if you look at the blue bars, that's the growth number. And so we'll just focus on core cities. So about 41,600 population units growth to 2044. And then between Linwood and Bothell, we only have a capacity for 30,600 roughly room to accommodate those population units. And so what we're left with is a gap between 2035 to 2044, because remember the buildable lands report only goes to 2035. And what that looks like for the core cities is a deficit of 11,000 population units. It's the same thing on the right graph. You see deficits in employment for a big deficit for Everett, deficit for the core cities, HCT communities. Cities and towns actually were the regional geographies that had a surplus. They had surplus on the population side as well. But that's just another way to view the numbers. Okay, so again, these are those numbers translated into housing units, not population units. We want to focus on the deficit numbers in red there. And we do want to caution our viewers and members of council that, although these numbers may appear to be large numbers, we're talking about growth to 2044 for the next 22 years. So when you keep that in mind, and suddenly the scale sort of shrinks, and we're not that far off from where we would need to be 20 years from now. And again, the bottom table just shows what that total looks like for Snohomish County when you add our existing units and jobs where we are today with the targets. Okay, now these are those numbers combined, so we can see what Bothell looks like as a whole, and so you can see that how surpluses and deficits are sort of balance out. But anyway, so we've got our bottom numbers here in the red, just coming shy of 700 housing units that we would have to accommodate by 2044. I'll have to defer to Director Kattermann to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have a redevelopment project going through the site plan approval process, or in the preliminary stages right now. I believe I want to say North Creek for like 900, close to 900 or 800 residential apartment units. And so that number quickly goes away when you talk about what we have in the pipeline. And anyway, so the bottom table here again shows us where we would be at 2044 when you combine those numbers: 30,000 housing units in Bothell and 51,000 jobs. And so that's our proportionate share that we're taking on through the regional growth strategy. Okay, getting towards the end here, When we met in April, council have supported staff with looking at how we could increase capacity in our activity centers downtown, North Creek and Brickyard, and then obviously in Snohomish County, Canyon Park with the sub-area plan implementation, Nike Hill and Red Barn Village. You'll recall that we did apply to designate our downtown as a countywide growth center. And on December 1st, we'll learn if we qualified. And so that, for example, would help us leverage resources to create improvements to help increase capacity downtown. Some things we're doing citywide outside of the sub areas, but also inside, we'll be leveraging some resources to study allowing missing middle housing in single family zones, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and the like, and then allowing parking reductions to increase density near especially bus rapid transit. And this is in addition to some of the recent accomplishments that Bothell has made with MFTE and to incentivize affordable housing and development in multifamily zones and for micro apartments, short plats from 4 to 9, and allowing duplexes on corner lots in single family zones. And so at the end here, the next steps are to get these targets officially adopted. We don't anticipate any changes from the numbers that we looked at, but it also obviously is a multi-jurisdiction and county effort. For King County, the targets are a part of the countywide planning policies. And so the King County Council is anticipated to approve those December 14th. And then that'll start the 90-day ratification process by all of the jurisdictions to agree on those numbers. In Snohomish County, the steering committee that is the official body that makes the recommendation to the county council is anticipated to take action December 1st. And so we'd have a public hearing and adoption of the growth targets early 2022, which segues into our periodic update, how this all trickles down, because these numbers are what we have to plan for in our comprehensive plan. And so scoping for that will begin in early 2022, and that will be due June 30th of 2024. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to council if you all have any questions for staff. Thank you.
I am not seeing any questions from council. Seems like a great presentation. Oh, no, Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. Apologize for the video. For some reason, I'm having some issues getting the video on. I can get a background, but I can't get my face to show up on there. So apologize for that. Real quickly, I wanted to ask a question on the deficits for jobs in Snohomish County. The criteria for the inefficient, not being able to meet that, those numbers, is there things that we're doing to accomplish to reduce that? Is there something that we can do to reduce that deficit number?
There are a couple of things that I can say in response to that. I think the first is that one of the main reasons that we're doing the periodic update is to identify where we can accommodate additional growth, whether that's housing or employment. So that's part of the process that we'll go through as we update the comprehensive plan, is look at areas that we can increase our capacity for additional jobs. Obviously, Canyon Park is our major growth center in Snohomish County, and downtown is our major growth center in King County. So that's something we'll be taking a closer look at through that process. The second thing I would note is when we did the Canyon Park sub-area plan update, we identified that we had growth, job growth in the Canyon Park sub-area between 2015 and 2020 of between 4,000 and 5,000 jobs. That was without adding any square footage at all. So we think that we're very comfortable that there are ways that we can accommodate that deficit that we're showing in terms of our capacity. So those are just a couple of ways that we can do that. I think we're also seeing a change in how employees are accommodated with telecommuting through the COVID pandemic, and then going beyond that. How we count employees in the future may change. So people may not actually be working at a site, but they may be counted as employees at that particular site. I know CGen, for example, is going to a reservation system for their office spaces. So they won't have their full workforce in the office at one time, but that workforce will be larger than what may be on site at any given time. So given those things, and like Nathen said, we're looking 20 years out. We feel that we'll be able to accommodate that growth in terms of jobs. I hope that answers your question, Councilmember McNeil.
Yeah, absolutely. Did help clarify the question and us looking long-term proactively and making those adjustments, because we know that, everything is ever changing right now with the way people are working more remotely. So I'm just thankful that we're actually looking and taking that proactive approach. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I should also mention, one of the reasons we wanted to come to you now with this update is, as Nathen mentioned, the Snohomish County Tomorrow Steering Committee is going to be voting on this on December 1st. So these will be our growth targets once those are approved by the steering committee and then adopted by the county council. That's the process in Snohomish County. And Mayor Olson sits on the steering committee. So if you have concerns or other questions, this is the best time for us to know about that, so we can prepare the mayor for anything that might be coming up on December 1st.
Councilmember Dewar.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Kattermann and Nathen. So obviously there's been a lot of discussion with Canyon Park and almost losing that regional growth center. Do we anticipate any issues with the voting for this plan? And typically, is there a kind of an amount that you can perform by that's within acceptable range? Do we have any concerns about that plan passing?
Thank you for the question. I don't have any particular concerns about it, because I think the main thing that we need to do, and that we have done with the sub-area plan, is demonstrate that we have the capacity to accommodate the amount of growth, and that there is market demand for that capacity. And we have that information as part of the sub-area plan. We still have to go through a certification process with PSRC for our plan. That was delayed because of the appeal by the Business Center Owners Association. Now that appeal is gone, so we're starting the process of certification, and that will go through the PSRC process. It has to go to 3 or 4 different committees, and then the sub-area plan is approved and certified, so that we retain our regional growth center at that point. If there's anything that looks like we may have some challenges, we can also address that through that periodic update in 2024. But at this point, I think we're in pretty good shape.
May I ask a follow-up, Mayor?
Yeah.
So currently, how are the jobs measured? Obviously, housing units are easy to measure. Is it a square footage basis? How are jobs? I mean, as you said, there's now telecommuting and whatnot, but traditionally, how are jobs measured in these types of updates?
And Nathen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's primarily done by square footage and type of business. So there's a factor for retail, there's a factor for office, there's a factor for warehousing. That's generally how it's done. I think there are also some adjustments that are made based on probably some ground truthing that we go out and look at what the actual employment is in some of these areas. And traditionally, Snohomish County has underestimated the amount of employment that exists. So I think our numbers actually show more employment within Canyon Park than I think that the buildable lands showed. So, we think we're in good shape there as well. Nathen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I'm sorry, Councilmember.
No, just clarification. It's showing more existing or more potential?
Both.
Okay.
Because they underestimate the number of employees that you could have in a particular area.
You can't just take a survey and get real numbers for employment? I guess I'm trying to understand.
Well, that's some of the ground truthing, but there's also they're trying to achieve some consistency in methodology across the different counties. That was something that came out of the last update to the buildable lands legislation. But we can also apply different factors. So there are still some local factors that change. We actually had some follow-up discussions with Snohomish County because we were in the process of doing the Canyon Park sub-area plan. And they increased our numbers, our capacity and our employment numbers to a certain extent as a result of that, but they still needed to follow their methodology.
Just out of curiosity, can I ask the square footage numbers for retail and different uses? Are those based on building codes or is that completely separate and different?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. We can look into that. Nathen, do you know that off the top of your head?
We didn't work as closely with on those calculations and methodology, but I'll take a stab at from what I could gather was that there were some assumed densities, and you take those assumed densities within non-residential zones for jurisdictions, and you apply a square foot per employee sort of ratio or factor, and that's how you would arrive at those numbers. But I would have to follow up to get a more informative answer.
I was just curious because as architects, right, we all use the same occupancy in codes. And so I was just thinking consistency wise, that would be one way for it to work across counties, but it's purely academic. I'm just curious.
I don't think they use occupancy. I think that's for a different purpose. I think they look more at what's more of a typical number of employees per square foot for businesses.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the questions.
All right. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
All right. Does anyone have a committee report they'd like to make? Deputy Mayor Zorns.
It's more of a point of interest. The holiday lights are in the process of going up. Like half of them are up, and in another week or two, the rest of Main Street is going to be all decked out. So if you're needing some sparkle at night, head down to Main Street.
Councilmember McCullough.
You're on mute, Councilmember McCullough.
Still on mute.
There.
There you go.
I wanted to talk about the opportunity today to join the North Shore YMCA and the Snohomish Comprehensive District and Bothell City Council on the Community Food Garden. So we went today to celebrate the opening of the food garden, and it was very much appreciated by all the people. That was a great partnership. And so I just wanted to report that I think you should all go to the North Shore YMCA and see those gardens that they're doing. They're going to help people in need. They're also going to help our young people harvest food. So Jeannie, Jonathan, and I went today, and it was a great opportunity to see how we could all be partners.
Thank you. All right. Visitor comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had two. We received one written comment from Andrew Nelson regarding volunteer opportunities for the pop-up shop event and that was forwarded to council and will be made part of the record. And we have one person that has signed up to speak this evening, and that is Eric Martin regarding police vaccine mandate. So we'll panel Mr. Martin in, and he'll be joining us just a second. Mr. Martin, can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Okay, great. Thank you. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay. So my name is Eric Martin, and I am a police sergeant with your police department. I recently sent in a letter to City Council via Human Resources and City Manager. I just wanted to put a face with those words. And then I have some talking points to follow up. I certainly don't want to enter into a political debate about the vaccines, but I would like to paint a picture of what is our reality at the police department. I know that for the past 20 months, we've been in people's homes, their cars, meeting them on the street, and there have been 0 instances of police officers giving a resident COVID, and vice versa. There's been 0 instances of residents of Bothell giving a police officer COVID. While contacting people, we always follow the stringent security measures that are in place to avoid giving or getting COVID. Secondly, I know that there's been multiple police agencies in our region that have recently had a vaccine mandate, and those have been catastrophic, specifically catastrophic to the people that those police departments serve. Issaquah, as an example, which is in our region. Some of the services that we would no longer be able to do would be, as an example, outreach to homeless, investigations to follow up on crimes, mental health outreach, and proactive patrol for crime suppression. The reason those things aren't going to be able to happen anymore is our numbers are going to dwindle. Estimates probably 17 to 20 officers right now are unvaccinated. Again, none of them have contracted COVID from them. I think at its base level, we are not emergency medical responders. That is a definition reserved for the fire department. And I fully understand that they have that requirement. We all understand that at some point, Governor Inslee may decide to do a mandate, and that is way beyond our purview. But I would strongly urge, please, to not shift us from essential to expendable, which is how it feels to us.
Thank you. That's all I'm showing and signed up to speak this evening. If there's anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak, please use the raise your hand function and we will panel you in. I'm not seeing anyone, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like our next item we have is an executive session. So we have a potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, parent 1, parent I, and it's anticipated to last for 15 minutes with no action expected. So we'll adjourn to an executive session outside of this one, and we will leave here and go to that meeting at this moment.
Recording stopped.
Welcome back. We are on to our next item, the consent agenda, and we have an item pulled, but we'll do the balance of the consent agenda items first, and then we will get to the pulled item. So Councilmember Dewar.
I move approval of the consent agenda as amended.
Thank you. And Councilmember Agnew.
I'll second that motion.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Dewar to pass the consent agenda with item AB 21-70 pulled, and a second by Councilmember Agnew. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none, City Clerk.
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Deputy Mayor Zorns,
Yes.
Councilmember Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember McCullough,
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil,
Yes.
Mayor Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Dorr,
Yes.
Councilmember Agnew.
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you, everyone. So we have AB 21-170, approval of contract with BEA Environmental to provide pollution prevention assistance program, consultation, and management services. And that was pulled by Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Yeah, I was just hoping that we could get a little more information and background on this little gem, because, you know, consent tends to get buried in our other discussion, and it would be great if we had a little more info on it.
Looks like we have Emily Warnock here to tell us a little bit more. Oh,
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. Can everyone hear me?
yes, we can.
Great. Well, it's great to see all of you. I'm happy to provide an overview of the program. We have partnered with the Department of Ecology since 2012 to provide education and outreach to businesses in Bothell who generate small quantities of hazardous waste. The goal of the program is really to prevent pollution and also potential health hazards by promoting safe storage and disposal of hazardous waste, as well as safer alternatives to products that businesses currently use. In 2019, we started working with BEA Environmental to expand our support to businesses, in part by offering site visits and technical assistance in languages other than English. So during this last grant cycle, about 15 to 20% of business visits were held in other languages, predominantly Spanish and Vietnamese. And we're anticipating that to increase to about 30% of visits in this next grant cycle. So with our goal of 200 site visits, it's about 35 or so that are expected to be held in other languages. In addition to that, the technical visits, BEA also hosted a virtual pollution prevention workshop for businesses back in March that included an option for breakout rooms in Zoom, where the training was actually provided in different languages as well. So Ecology is featuring this case study in their biennial report on the program. And because of its success, we'll be holding another workshop like this during the next grant cycle from 2021 to 2023. Also under this contract, we'll be participating on a committee to develop videos to help guide businesses with a special focus on creating videos in different languages to really make sure that our outreach accommodates the needs of our community. So along with the language barriers that we've encountered along the way, time has been another barrier for a lot of businesses. And these videos that we're working to develop during this next grant cycle should help to address that gap as well. So overall, we've made a lot of progress on preventing pollution and offering more inclusive outreach to our community, and look forward to continuing this work.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments. I just want to say thank you, Emily, for the presentation. It seems like a no-brainer that a city would just do this anyway. But I'm very grateful that we are doing it. And what did you say, over 200 businesses that we're supporting on this?
We'll support about 120 businesses with 200 site visits. So
okay, there we go. Okay. Well, we're keeping you busy in a good way. So thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, raise your card. Otherwise, I'll move the recommended action.
Councilmember Agnew.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. So we have Deputy Mayor Zorns with a motion to authorize the interim city manager to enter into contract with BEA Environmental in the amount of $158,550 to provide the city with pollution prevention assistance program, consultation, and management services, with the second by Councilmember Agnew. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none. City Clerk?
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Deputy Mayor Zorns,
Yes.
Councilmember Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember McCullough,
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil,
Yes.
Mayor Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Dorr,
Yes.
Councilmember Agnew.
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, on to our next agenda item, AB 21-172. So we have the introduction of Quynh Pham, General Manager of the Residence Inn Bothell, for an appointment to the Lodging Tax and Advisory Committee. And there we have our Tourism Manager, Danae McGee.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. As Mayor Olson said, my name is Danae McGee, and I am the Tourism Manager for the City of Bothell. I'm also the Staff Liaison for LTAC, which stands for the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. I'm here tonight to introduce you to Quynh Pham, who has applied to fill one of 2 open positions currently on LTAC. As you all know, LTAC advises council on the city's hotel motel tax funds, and by law must be comprised of 1 elected official, which in this case is Deputy Mayor Zorns, 3 recipients of the tax, and 3 providers of the tax. And these providers are Bothell-based hotels. Due to the need for an even number of recipients to providers of the tax, staff is recommending council fill 1 of the 2 open positions on the hotel side. We did do a call for these 2 open positions. However, we only received 1 application by the deadline. And our plan is to fill the 3rd open position when council opens the process for all boards and commissions in the 1st quarter of next year. We are not asking council to vote tonight. That will occur on November 7th. Tonight is just an opportunity for you to get to know Quynh and to ask her some questions about herself. So if there are no further questions from me, I'd like to introduce you to Quynh Pham, the GM of Bothell's Residence Inn.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Quynh. I'm the General Manager at the Residence Inn in Bothell. It's an honor to be here tonight to meet all of you.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for volunteering for the LTAC committee.
Of course, I'm excited to be on part of the LTAC committee.
Does anyone have any questions? Oh, Deputy Mayor Zorns.
I'm sitting here racking my brain. What are the questions that we've asked in the past? And I'm just drawing a blank. Just thank you very much for stepping up to the plate and applying. I guess I'll just ask you a question. What's one of the best things about doing business here in Bothell?
I enjoyed it. I have only been here for 5 months. So far, it's just working, getting the hotel fill and get staffing. I enjoy it very much because the clientele here is just a lot nicer than the other area that I've worked in the past.
Well, that's good to hear. And how's the staffing levels going for you?
I would say, still filling a lot of positions. It's very hard to recruit. This is the same problem for every hotel right now.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm glad we got a chance to meet you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Bothell.
Thank you.
Thank you for serving on one of our boards. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me? Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you all.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple public hearings coming up here. So we have AB 21-173. So a public hearing for the consideration of adoption of an ordinance establishing the EMS levy in the Snohomish County portion of Bothell for 2022. So we will recess the Bothell City Council meeting and open the meeting as the EMS board. And then we will open the public hearing. And we have Finance Director Chris Bothell here to lead us in this discussion.
Good evening. I just have a brief introduction. The proposed 2022 Snohomish County EMS levy includes the value of the 2021 levy plus the allowable 1% annual increase. The levy funds emergency medical services for the Snohomish County side of Bothell. The King County side is funded by a similar but separate levy. The value of the proposed levy is assumed in the adopted 2021-2022 budget. And that's the introduction.
Thank you. Board Clerk, do we have any public comment?
We do not. And I am not seeing anybody in the audience that wishes to speak.
Does anyone on the EMS board have a question for Director Bothell? All right, I will entertain a motion by the board. Board Member Agnew.
Yes, I recommend that we adopt the proposed ordinance authorizing the 1% increase in the EMS levy for the Snohomish County portion of Bothell.
Board Member Dewar.
I second that motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Board Member Agnew to adopt the proposed ordinance authorizing a 1% increase in the EMS levy for the Snohomish County portion of Bothell, with a second by Board Member Dewar. Any discussion on this item? Board Member Thompson.
I just wanted to say thank you for your service on this board, Chair Olson.
Board Member Dewar.
I would just like to say you have done that more smoothly than anyone I've ever seen make that transition. So bravo to you.
Thank you. I was just saving our city attorney from having to come in and walk us through that again, but
thank you.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, Board Clerk with the vote.
Let me see if I can do this smoothly. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Board Member Zorns?
Yes.
Board Member Thompson?
Yes.
Board Member McCullough?
Yes.
Board Member McNeil?
Yes.
Chair Olson?
Yes.
Board Member Dewar?
Yes.
Board Member Agnew?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. So that will now adjourn the EMS board meeting, and we will reconvene the Bothell City Council meeting. And we'll move right into our next public hearing, AB 21-174, public hearing and consideration of the ordinance to renew interim official control, allowing temporary use of the private property and parking areas for outdoor use. So I will now open the public hearing, and we have our Community Development Director, Michael Kattermann, to present on this topic.
Thank you, and good evening. And I can call you Mayor Olson again. Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Deputy Mayor and members of the council. Won't be quite as brief as Director Bothell, but I will try to keep this succinct. So this probably looks familiar to you. This is the fourth time you've seen this. It's kind of like Yogi Berra. It's deja vu all over again. This is an interim control that was put in place at the beginning of the pandemic, early in the pandemic, and back in June of 2020. And the purpose of it at that time, and continues to be, to allow restaurants and eating establishments to have outdoor dining because of restrictions for indoor dining. Restrictions have changed over time, obviously, but one of the restrictions that is still in place is, in King County at least, there's a requirement to have proof of vaccination or recent negative COVID test in order to be able to be seated in a restaurant. So this will allow for some outdoor dining in those areas for those patrons who are not able to provide that documentation. Only about a half a dozen restaurants in Bothell have taken advantage of this, but it has not been an onerous burden on staff to provide for the permitting for these. We do have a permit process in place, and we felt that it's worth continuing this for another 6 months, which is the purpose of this public hearing this evening and the interim ordinance. So these are good for 6 months at a time. We're meeting the state requirements for an interim ordinance to do that, holding the public hearing. And we have a plan in place to continue to monitor, and then we'll come back to the council, obviously, before this expires again in June of 2022. And the council can then decide at that time whether to continue or not. The council also has the option of ending the interim ordinance at any time through simple motion and action and vote by the council. So there are actually two questions before you this evening in terms of policy discussion. One is whether to renew this temporary waiver of certain requirements that allow for private parking, private property, particularly parking areas to be used for outdoor dining. And then also to continue to waive any permit fees, except special inspection fees if someone needs this inspector to come out on an evening or a weekend when we typically charge an extra fee for that. So that is that's the summary of what we're asking for from the council this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Dewar.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Kattermann. Can you remind us what fees we would normally charge in this type of scenario?
So there would be typically be for a temporary structure. Usually there's one for tents, and it sometimes involves building. Usually it's more for the fire department, the Community Risk and Reduction division that takes a look at that. As far as the actual fee amounts, I don't recall off the top of my head. I think we're talking about maybe a few $100s at most. It's not a significant financial amount.
And I think we asked a few months ago if we could learn more about the potential, and I think we asked it of Director Bothell, but I'd still be interested in finding out kind of the net on waiving the fees and versus potentially what we might have made in allowing these type of structures. I'd still be interested to know.
We can certainly calculate that fairly simply because like I said, we've only had about six that have taken advantage of this. Mm-hmm. So we can go back and figure out what we would have charged them, and I can get that information to you.
But you're still recommending that we not charge any fees at this time?
Correct, because the fee is the amount of the fee and the way that we're handling this. We're not requiring a lot of review time. We're doing this as a subject to field inspection. So they submit the information of what they're proposing to do. There's a quick check just to make sure that they're complying with ADA and access and any fire code provisions. And that's done in the field. So there's no one actually reviewing the plans. We just have an inspector go out and make sure that they're meeting all the basic requirements.
Perfect. I applaud all of your efforts to make this work for our city. I think it's been a great success, and thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember McCullough.
I'm very pleased that we can do this. And I want to know, does this and Main Street have the same timeline?
They're a little bit out of sync. I think Main Street right now, and Interim City Manager Lenhart, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that currently goes through March. This would extend through June, early June.
So I think what I would kind of think about is like making them kind of cohesive so they're both about the same timeline. But if not, it's still good. I appreciate your work.
Well, thank you. Mm-hmm. And we'll be coming back to the council in June. If this isn't lifted before then, we'll come back to the council in June. And you may have the option of syncing things up at that time if the council so desires. I'd also point out that they are certainly similar in what they're doing, but they actually come at it from very different ways, because what we're talking about is just private property in this case. So in essence, we are waiving parking requirements that they would normally have to provide parking in these areas as part of their required parking for the use that's there. And we're saying we're not going to worry about how many parking spaces you have right now, so you can use that for outdoor dining. And if a restaurant already has more parking than is required, they would be able to continue this even without the interim ordinance.
Well, I think this is critically important for our restaurants to be able to survive throughout this COVID period. So thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
No questions. I just wanted to add to the appreciation for you, Director Kattermann, and staff who've made this so graciously available to our businesses. It matters a lot. And if you said we needed to charge for it, I would get it, because I know it's costing time out of the day to go check on these, even though it's not a huge amount of time. So I just want to pass on my thanks for the graciousness in making this happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think if we had a larger number of establishments that were taking advantage of this, we might have to revisit the fee question. But at this point, there hasn't been as many as I thought there would be, frankly.
Regardless, I still appreciate it.
Thank you.
City Clerk, did we receive any public comment on this topic?
We did not.
Councilmember Thompson, saw your card.
I'd like to move the recommended action.
All right, Councilmember Dewar.
Second that.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Councilmember Thompson to adopt the ordinance renewing for 6 months the interim official control that temporarily allows use of private property parking for outdoor dining, with the second by Councilmember Dewar. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none, City Clerk.
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Deputy Mayor Zorns,
Yes.
Councilmember Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember McCullough,
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil,
Yes.
Mayor Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Dorr,
Yes.
Councilmember Agnew.
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. On to AB 21-175. So consideration of ordinance allowing the possession and use of certain consumer fireworks. And on cue, we have our city attorney, Paul Byrne, with us.
Greetings, council members. So just to kind of review a little bit, earlier this year in June, the council passed a ban on possession, use, and sale of fireworks within the city limits. At that time, I believe it was Deputy Mayor Zorns that requested that we look at the Auburn code to see if to look at their carve-outs to see if our fire marshal would endorse any of those carve-outs to our own code. The fire marshal wasn't on board with a lot of those. However, the council did ask that we bring back an ordinance for consideration that might do a carve-out that they could either add to or subtract from. And so that's what we have done tonight. So the carve-outs that we propose that are classified as consumer fireworks would be for sparklers and tanks. The code also addresses what are called novelty or trick items, which are the little poppets, the little poppers, the snakes that you light and they turn into a string of carbon, and then the novelty smoke bombs. And so if passed, then this would allow the use of those, the possession and use of those items, similar to what we had in the past from July 1st to July 4th, with the use of them on July 4th only from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. I should let council know that because if they want to add to the consumer fireworks list, what we would propose is to bring this back at a later date to put on the consent agenda to add those items. The reason we're doing that is that the definitions of these consumer fireworks are very specific, and it would not be something that I could do on the fly tonight and add to. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Cool.
Councilmember Thompson.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank staff for bringing this back. I know that this was a bigger part of the discussion that we had around fireworks earlier in the year. And I know this part was important to some of us up here on the dais. So I'm really happy to see that follow through happen. So thank you.
Absolutely. And all credit goes to Fire Marshal Butch Noble and Deputy City Attorney Robbie Seppler.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Well, I'll just use this window to say thank you. When I was out doorbelling this summer around the 4th, even except for one lone person who wanted nothing on 4th of July, everyone who was wanting the fireworks ban wanted something for kids. That was something that they really mattered. So thanks to staff who made this happen, because I think it's a good sampling of things that kids can have fun with on the 4th of July. And my thanks to council for supporting that, because I think you brought something. We could have easily just rubber stamped and said no fireworks, and just wiped our hands and walked away. But I think we brought something special to Bothell that most of the cities around this area have not done. So staff gets credit and this council gets credit. So thank you.
Councilmember Dewar.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Attorney. I agree. I think this was a great process, and I'm glad that we came back. We made a commitment to come back and revisit this and look at it, and so I'm glad we have. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to move the recommended action.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Second.
Thank you. So I'm going to have a motion by Councilmember Dewar to approve the ordinance allowing the possession and use of the specified consumer fireworks, with a second by Deputy Mayor Zorns. Any discussion on the item? Councilmember Agnew.
I won't be supporting this motion for the simple fact that I've seen the damage sparklers do to kids, and I just can't support that personally.
Seeing no further discussion, City Clerk.
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Yes.
Councilmember Thompson.
Yes.
Councilmember McCullough.
No.
Councilmember McNeil.
Yes.
Mayor Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Dewar.
Yes.
Passes 5-2 with council members McCullough and Agnew in the negative.
Thank you. On to AB 21-176. So we have a consideration of a supplemental engagement letter with McCullough Hill Leary for legal services. And I believe we are sticking with our city attorney, Paul Byrne.
That is correct. And so I'm speaking also to the council as well, but mainly to the members of the public. Unfortunately, because this is an ongoing lawsuit that the city has filed, there aren't many details that I can give. We are in the late stages of this process, and our trial date is in April of 2022. We anticipated going to trial at this point. And so in order to wrap this matter up, this hopefully will be our last request for an amendment for these purposes, but it is necessary to see this process through. And as we have stated in the past, we are anticipating to recover our costs at the conclusion of this litigation. So we are asking once again for an increase in the engagement amount and adding $250,000, and hopefully this will be the last time. I'm happy to answer questions. I may have to be tight-lipped because of the litigation, but I'll do my best.
Councilmember Dewar.
I move the recommended action.
Councilmember Agnew.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Dewar to approve the supplemental engagement letter and authorize the interim city manager to further engage the services of McCullough Hill Leary regarding Lot P South litigation, with the second by Council Member Agnew. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none. City Clerk?
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Deputy Mayor Zorns?
Yes.
Councilmember Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember McCullough?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Mayor Olson?
Yes.
Councilmember Dorr?
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Agnew?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. On to AB 21-177. So city policy direction on COVID-19 vaccinations and or testing mandates. So I believe we'll have our Human Resources Director, Matt Pruitt, join us.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's good to see you again. Have walked down the hall, and please ignore me for a second while I pull up a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. All right. I'm hoping everybody can see that. Let me know if you cannot. So we're here this evening to talk to you about what we have been doing in regards to protecting the workforce in regards to COVID-19, and then to seek some policy direction from you on COVID-19 vaccination or testing mandates. So why are we here discussing this issue? Employers are all over our region, the state of Washington, the federal government are considering vaccine mandates. The reasons is that the consensus is the vaccine mandates work. Not fully vaccinated employees are 3 times more likely to test positive for COVID-19. Not fully vaccinated individuals are 12 times more likely to be hospitalized for COVID-19, and not fully vaccinated individuals are 13 times more likely to die of COVID-19 related illnesses. There's also a lot of uncertainty in the workplace. It's been an uncertain time for sure since March of 2020. This slide shows you the case count in Washington State throughout the pandemic. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what this is doing in the future. We are currently on the downside with cases in our state and our region, but there's a lot of uncertainty about various COVID-19 variants and whether or not we will continue to have to deal with this pandemic and how long that will occur. So we have done a number of things throughout the pandemic to essentially address the impact to our workforce. Basically, the first thing that occurred is in March 2020, Mayor Olson declared an emergency, and that declaration allowed us to do a number of things. We set up an emergency coordination center, and that group has met basically weekly or bi-weekly since March 2020. Through that group, that group's planning division, we have created an implementation team that has worked in cooperation with the Human Resources Department and the executive leadership team throughout COVID-19. We implemented a pandemic preparedness policy. That policy directed employees who are experiencing symptoms or have tested positive for COVID-19 to stay home from work. That policy also required telecommuting for employees whose jobs enabled them to do so, and created emergency work at home leave that allowed the city to send employees home if needed to avoid exposure to COVID-19. In March 2020, Congress passed and President Trump signed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Among other things, that law allowed for expanded use of family and medical leave for the purposes of allowing employees flexibility in dealing with medical issues related to COVID-19. It also provided 80 hours of sick leave for employees that can be used for reasons related to COVID-19, in addition to paid leave that is currently provided by the city. That law expired December 31st of that same year, but by the city's decision and approval of the city manager, we've extended the emergency sick leave provision of that law and continue to provide that to employees to this day. We have also implemented a COVID-19 exposure control plan that basically is in response to requirements and regulations that have come out of the governor's office. That plan includes alterations to work areas and environments in order to maintain 6 feet social distancing, and it outlines the city's protocols when employees test positive for COVID or are exposed to COVID-19. We have implemented several iterations of a mask policy. I would say we've had 3 or 4 different iterations of our current mask policy. Right now, city employees are all required to wear masks while at work, unless there are exceptions, such as they're in the current act of eating or drinking, or they have an approval to not wear a mask because they've received an accommodation through the Americans with Disability Act, or they have a need to communicate with an employee that needs to use lip reading for the purposes of communicating. The other exception of this is that currently our firefighters within the fire station are not required to wear a mask in accordance with the governor's proclamation requiring vaccines for firefighters. If they're out of the fire station, they obviously have to meet all the requirements of the city. But all other city employees are currently wearing masks at work. We've temporarily had a COVID-19 health screening policy. For many months, employees were required to fill out a COVID-19 health screening survey on their smartphone or computer. The HR department tracked that information, and if employees answered yes to any of the questions, they were directed to contact their supervisor, not to report to work, and city protocols under our exposure plan would be enacted. The city has since ended our health screening policy and is relying on employees to self-screen. And as part of that effort, we've installed standing non-touch thermometers at key locations throughout the city. We have also implemented a temporary telecommuting policy. The intent of that policy was to relax the city's regular telecommuting requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. It provided a $300 online reimbursement to help employees purchase equipment needed in order to do their jobs at home. That's a one-time reimbursement. It adopted a new remote work telecommuting policy. Since then, we've adopted a new remote work telecommuting policy that will replace this temporary policy once it is enacted. Once we have returned to sort of in-person services, that policy that the permanent policy that you recently approved has been shared with employees, but again, is not in place. We're still under the temporary policy at this time. Approximately 40% of city staff have been able to telecommute a majority of the time. Most employees of the police department, fire department, public works department, and operations, parks department, and the municipal court have continued to report to work full-time or a majority time throughout the pandemic. We've also created a reentry plan, which is exactly what it sounds like. The plan is an extension and meant to replace the COVID-19 exposure control plan. It addresses work conditions and environmental changes that will be in place in order to protect employees after City Hall is reopened to in-person services. At present time, the city is monitoring COVID-19 cases throughout the region, including the spread of the Delta variant and other variants. And we have told employees that we will provide 2 weeks notice before restoring in-person city services. The latest policy that we've done, the most recent policy, is we implemented a temporary policy and procedure to require vaccinations for new city employees before their first day. We did this for a couple reasons. One was we had concerns from our operational managers that we were getting job candidates that were leaving other employers and coming to Bothell because we currently didn't have a vaccine mandate. We were also recognizing that the city, we believe that the city is likely to have to implement a mandate in accordance with state and federal regulations. And we are also in the process of developing a vaccine mandate for city volunteers. The thing that I would like to impress upon you with the previous slide is not only all of the work that we have done to keep employees safe, but also the fact that it's a lot of work. All of the things that I listed for you and discussed with you on the previous slide are things that were not planned for. We don't have staff that can directly work on COVID-19. For the most part, it's done by employees that already have other current tasks that they needed to do, and have taken on this, forming this work and creating these policies and implementing these policies because we had to in order to keep each other safe. There are lots of regulatory requirements on vaccinations that are coming about and being discussed, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about them in the news. The first one, of course, is the Governor's Proclamation 21.14.1. This occurred in August 2020. Governor Inslee issued a proclamation requiring full vaccination of healthcare workers. The city was notified in a letter from the State Council of Firefighters and the Washington State Fire Chiefs that the proclamation did include and would include our firefighters and EMTs. And they recommended that the city begin impact bargaining the vaccine mandates with our firefighter union. We did so, and we have agreed to a memorandum of understanding with Local 2099. That MOU has been implemented, and our vaccination rate for our fire department is at 94%. There have been a lot of court cases in Washington State about the Governor's Proclamation, and to date, all of them have ruled in favor of the proclamation. The other thing that you may be hearing about is the current regulations being passed down through the federal government, through the Department of Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Basically, the federal regulations require any employer over 100 employees, which the city is, to either vaccinate employees or require weekly testing. Those regulations have currently been blocked by the Fifth Circuit, who issued a stay and then ruled in favor of keeping their stay. I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of what is going to go on with this is that this issue will be fast-tracked through the court system. It is expected that there are a lot of court cases in regards to the OSHA regulations throughout the country. And my understanding is what will happen is that those cases will eventually be consolidated, or most of them will be consolidated, and there will be a lottery to determine which circuit court in the country basically rules on this issue and fast tracks this issue to determine if OSHA regulations will be implemented. If they are implemented, they do include a vaccine requirement or weekly testing to be implemented in the middle of January. Part of those OSHA regulations are that states can choose if they desire to create their own plan. Governor Inslee has announced that he wants to do that and will do that. What that means is that Washington State can have its own plan that goes further than OSHA regulations. And in his press conference, he indicated that that would be the case. Specifically, one difference is that we do not expect there to be a test out option in Washington State. So where the federal regulations require vaccinations or testing, it looks like in Washington State, when those regulations come down, that there will not be the test out option in our state. Where the court cases have taken the OSHA regulations and how that impacts the Washington State plan at this point is anybody's guess. A few days ago, we were expecting to hear from Washington State by November 20th, but whether or not the court cases impact that, we just don't know at this time. So if things happen the way that we think they will happen, in the sense the way that the governor has indicated that he would do them, this is what we can basically expect to be required of the city moving forward. Employees at some particular date will be required to show a proof of vaccination. They will be able to apply for religious or medical exemptions, and the city will have to have a process that will be led by the Human Resources Department to determine, number one, if to approve those exemptions, and number two, can we accommodate them? If employees are unvaccinated and they don't receive a medical or religious exemption, they would have the option to resign or retire. And if that didn't occur, they would receive a lateral mill hearing, which happens before we end the employment of any city employee. And all of this will be subject to impact bargaining. So this is sort of an outline of the few things that we can expect. and we have notified our unions that if things happen the way that folks at the state and federal level have said they were happen, this is what they can expect. Obviously, things can change as regulations come down, but all of this will more than likely have to be bargained with our 3 bargaining units and moving forward. So this slide shows you the vaccination rates. I should say the known vaccination rates at the city. We cannot require that employees show us their vaccination at this point, but we have been asking employees to voluntarily do that since this last summer. We had a mask mandate that we lifted for a temporary time for unvaccinated employees, and employees reported their unvaccinated status in order to be able to take off their mask part of the time while they were at work. We also have had employees since that time report their vaccination status to us, but we don't know if every employee that has been vaccinated has actually reported that to the city. So what you see here is that in our operational departments, vaccination rates are anywhere between 65 and 75%, with the exception of our Parks Department, which is at 94%. And in the administrative city hall departments, we are over 90% in those departments with vaccination. Citywide, 82% of employees, or we know that 82% of employees are currently fully vaccinated. In regards to COVID-19 cases and exposures, this has been a difficult thing to track within our workforce. Quite frankly, if we'd have known about COVID-19, what we know now, and if we knew it in March of 2020, we might have approached this issue a little differently than we have. There are also privacy concerns that we have to consider. Employees under EEOC regulations have a right to expect that we are not going to share medical status. And so that has been a factor that has been at play here as well. Currently, we estimate that 1 employee has become infected with COVID-19 every 1 to 2 months. Higher rates have come since the Delta variant, and not all infected employees have been present at work. So in most cases, we've been successful when people have become infected with COVID-19, they reported that and they haven't been in at work and exposing other employees. There have been rare instances of that, but most of the time that has not occurred. COVID exposures have had a much greater impact. So, and the reason for that is essentially the quarantine requirements from public health departments. For instance, if an unvaccinated employee is exposed to COVID-19, they can't be present at work for 14 days. Vaccinated employees can come back almost immediately if they are willing to basically take quick tests that we provide to them at City Hall or over at the Public Works Operations Center or in the Fire and Police Department. And they have to take those tests basically for 17 days in a row. Overall, we've been able to maintain service levels at the city. There has been the rare occasion where we've had a whole work division shut down or not at work because of a COVID exposure or an employee has contracted COVID-19. Our current position on this issue throughout the pandemic has been that we have consistently relied on the input of federal, state, and local agencies. And we believe that vaccination is the best way to prevent further the spread of COVID-19. And we strongly encourage employees to get fully vaccinated. And we do that in a number of ways and through communication, whether it be all employee emails, whether it be workshops, whether it be virtual open houses. We have encouraged employees to become vaccinated. The reason for this position is there's a couple of reasons. The first one is that we're not a public health agency and we don't have the resources to basically understand the impacts of all these decisions within the city. And so we rely on those agencies to provide us guidance. The second reason is that when it comes to employment law, generally the city likes to be consistent with what other folks in the market are doing and what other municipalities in our region are doing. And there just isn't consistency at this time when it comes to vaccination mandates. And so by waiting for regulations to direct employers to do that would bring more uniform policies throughout the region and within other cities. From what I know at this point, cities like the city of Issaquah, Seattle, and Shoreline are mandating vaccines. Other cities, Kenmore, Woodinville, Kirkland, Redmond, have not at present time mandated vaccines. So there's lots of inconsistency throughout the region on this issue right now. We have 3 options that we'd like to hear from you about tonight and get direction on. Number 1, the first option would be that we continue down the path of following the direction of federal, state, and local agencies. If this is the option we choose, we would continue to monitor the status of the OSHA regulations and all the related court cases and the state requirements that may be coming from Governor Inslee in the state of Washington. We would also implement vaccination mandates in line with federal and state requirements when they are known. The second option is to direct staff to return to council with a policy to implement a vaccination and/or testing mandate for city employees. You have the authority to do that. It is my professional opinion that court cases have granted you that authority, and other municipalities have done that. And if this were the option we chose, staff would develop a policy and return to council for approval in the coming weeks. The third option is, of course, we can always bring you more information, and simply if you wanted us to do more study and research before choosing which path to take, we could do that and come back to you with more answers. That is my presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can discuss this matter and I can answer your questions.
Councilmember Thompson.
I'll go first if nobody else wants to. Thank you for the presentation, Matt. I've got just a couple questions. What kind of timeline do we expect to have a decision from OSHA / the state?
So the timeline with OSHA, I can't give you one because it depends on the court cases. What we were told before those court cases happen is that the state of Washington would have requirements out before November or sometime around November 20th. It's what's unclear to me at this time is whether or not those court cases will impact if the state does implement its own regulations or not. There's lots of opinions either way on that regardless of the OSHA decisions, the court cases in regards to OSHA, the state could still require a vaccine mandate of employers. And the reason for that is that those court cases mostly have to do with the federal government and actually imply that the states do have the right to do this. But at this time, I can't give you a specific date.
Okay, but the state had originally said like around now, basically.
Yep.
And the court cases just, and you mentioned, I believe that they were kind of being fast tracked.
Yep.
Okay. In terms of bargaining, what are the differences if we do this now as opposed to wait for state action?
It depends. For instance, I think we're going to have to bargain either way. It's a change to working conditions. If it's done by the state, then my assumption at this time is the state would require us to bargain it like they did with the governor's proclamation that affected our firefighters. But depending on what those regulations are, the impacts may be more or less. For instance, if there is a test out option that is proposed like in the OSHA regulations where unvaccinated employees can choose to test weekly, one might argue that there'd be less impacts to bargain, but until we get those regulations, I don't even know if that's going to happen. And so I think we're going to have to bargain the impacts regardless of what option we choose.
Okay, so not a lot of difference one way or the other, but
Not
no real great way to know.
Not a lot.
I don't really know a delicate way to ask this. How much harder do we make your life if we do this now as opposed to wait?
That's not really relevant to the conversation. If you're asking about administrative burden, which is something that we ought to consider.
Yes.
Again, that kind of depends. So there will be a lot of administrative workload if we do religious and medical exemptions. That was the biggest part of the workload with the process with the firefighters. And there are more non-firefighters of the city than there are within the fire department. So one might assume that we would have more to do with that. So if we choose to do a policy, or if the regulations if we don't have a test out option, if we're simply going to require vaccinations, but not have the option for unvaccinated employees to test weekly, then that is going to be the greater workload. It really, but the options really don't matter. It's more like what the regulations say, or what the final policy is that will impact the administrative burden of implementing all this. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, really fundamentally, what I'm getting at with all of these questions is eventually, I think we need to have a vaccine mandate in place. It's just a question of what is the easiest way to get there. And I mean, we have lots of people with interim in their titles in city staff right now, and I'm concerned about just the administrative burden. And I mean, as you mentioned, everybody's doing this outside of their current jobs, and they have other jobs that still need to be done. And I don't want to place a big burden on staff if this is something that's going to kind of happen shortly anyway.
Yes. Sorry.
I mean, I was just going to say that's sort of what I'm weighing as we go through this.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I would add is that at present time, the staff is recommending option one, and that's for the reasons that we've already talked about. It's just simply easier to implement things like this in employment law when there's more consistency in the region throughout what other municipalities we're doing. And if we're all regulated to do that, that is going to reduce some of the burden of implementing a vaccine mandate.
Okay. One more question. The fire department, obviously it was mandated from the state, and we've gone through that process. What percentage of the fire department was unvaccinated when that mandate went into place?
Oh, I want to say, I can't give you a specific number. My recollection is that we were in the mid 60s.
Okay. So, and I think on the slide you showed, we're at 6% now in the fire department.
Yes.
Is unvaccinated. So
correct.
Almost everybody got vaccinated instead of quit. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
So what you're telling me is we didn't have a procedural manual to cover pandemic.
No.
We're doing this on the fly. And the volume of work you've done, I just am gobsmacked and very appreciative. We got testimony that our essential workers are not expendable. And I very, very much view all of our city employees as not expendable. And then I am, first in line for vaccines. My children, begrudgingly, they were all shoved in line for vaccines, including flu vaccines, before kids were allowed to have flu vaccines. So I'm very pro vaccines. Mandates, I give me great pause. And so I support waiting. It kind of reminds me, I'm having shades of our plastic ban. We worked to come up with a plastic bag ban, and then the state came up with one anyway. So my inclination is that if we've got healthy protocol in place already, let's just wait and see what happens with option one. And then this is not my own personal mandate. I am bracing for COVID here to stay. And we are going to have to change up our game constantly with this to stay away from how it's communicated between our community members. And so I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know that anybody really does, but I think we all need to start kind of gearing up to this is something that we're going to have to be addressing on a regular routine basis. And right now we're in the middle of process of figuring out what that is.
Councilmember Agnew.
this whole thing was made political, and that's a tragedy that we have here. I don't know how many have been to Washington, D.C. lately, but when you walk from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument and you cross the street, you look over to the left and there are little white flags. And the flags represent Americans that have died during COVID. There's 750,000. I mean, we just say that number arbitrarily now. That field was very, very impressive to see. You know, in a pandemic, your options are limited. You know, your options are vaccination. Your option is isolation. Well, we can't do isolation with our employees. We can vaccinate our employees. And then the testing option, all a test does is confirms your diagnosis. It doesn't say you don't have it. I would like to see us initiate a vaccination policy in this city for the protection of our citizens.
Councilmember McCullough.
Thank you. So this is very difficult because we're trying to keep track of what is the best thing to do for our people and how to keep them safe. And I believe that option one is pretty important in that we follow the guidelines of the federal, state, and local agencies, because they're the ones that have the information and the data. And I just think it's important that we can track that and we follow those guidelines. So I hope that while we're doing this, we can protect our people. I think that's what's critically important here.
Councilmember Dewar.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm torn too. I completely agree with Councilmember Agnew. This has been politicized and it shouldn't be. I mean, our kids are vaccinated all the time to go to school. But on the other hand, you know, staff's making a recommendation. I guess I would say that if something doesn't happen, I'd like to see this come back if there's not a state mandate. There's no reason to expose people. Like maybe things haven't happened yet, but you know, we keep getting stronger variants. So there are no guarantees. The vaccine is the best thing, the best protection we have. And let's remember, we're not talking about just our police. We're talking about the constituents that they serve. And so I'm torn. I'd like to make a mandate, but I understand staff's recommendation and I'll go with that. But I totally agree with Councilmember Agnew. And I appreciate all the questions that were asked by Councilmember Thompson. So I'm happy to make a motion, but I don't know if anyone else is left to speak. So.
For the record, I don't know that we need a motion. This is a study session item, and I'm making notes about what you're all saying. But I'm not the city attorney either. But I don't think we need an actual motion on this issue.
Correct. We're just getting guidance.
All right, I'd like to weigh in as well. I think, as Councilmember Dewar just expressed, it is a tough decision, and I think with this being such a regional issue with regional solutions, it really, I think, needs the guidance of the county, the state level, even the federal level. But I think our state will come sooner than OSHA and the federal level. So I think we've looked at the county and the state for much of the guidance this time. And as Matt has said, you know, we're looking to them for their technical expertise on this. So I think I would continue to hold out on that. and hopefully we get some resolution and some action from those agencies in the very near future. Councilmember McNeil, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Apologize for not catching before you, but I would have to agree with Councilmember Agnew and the comments that he made that one life lost is one too many. And speaking as somebody who's lost several family members to COVID, anything and everything we can do to get people vaccinated and to keep them safe, I think is hugely important. I'd just like to add that I do agree that, you know, as we sit here and we have dialogue and we talk about this important topic, it's important to listen to those who are the experts and understand not only just the local approach, but the regional and national approach on how we take care of this pandemic and how we get out in front of it and hopefully at some point get it behind us. But I do believe, you know, the things that I'm hearing regionally are that we do need to find a way to get more people vaccinated. So while I would like to have a mandate, I'd like to also follow the state and federal guidelines and guidance. So I would be in support of option one at this point, but hopefully we can find a way to have mandates and get more people vaccinated in the near future.
So I think we've had everyone give their opinions, give you some guidance on that, Matt. All right, see the thumbs up on you got the information that you needed for now. So thank you and keep up the great work. All right, AB 21-178. Let's see. We have the third quarter report on 2021-2022 council goals and priorities, and I will turn it over to our interim city manager, Erin Lenhart.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. In your packet this evening, starting on page 113, is the third quarter council scorecard update. As a reminder, this is a way of sharing staff's progress on council's 2021-2022 goals and priorities. In the interest of time, I will share a few highlights from the last quarter's many accomplishments. And again, this is through the end of September. So on the council goal of pursuing equity through inclusive community engagement, one of the highlights is we worked on diversity, equity, and inclusion program with bias training for council and some staff members. We finalized new dive-in team roster and hosted a community listening session with more than 40 community members. On council's focus on long-term financial sustainability priority, staff secured a $5,000 grant for tree planting at the former Wayne Golf Course. Related to your maintain existing infrastructure priority, staff completed the 2021 arterial crack sealing project, as well as local sealing in Canyon Creek, Maywood Hills, and West Hill neighborhoods. These activities are funded by the Safe Streets and Sidewalks Levy, as a reminder. Providing a safe and secure community priority. The police department has started its new community academy, very successful, it sounds like. The priority of supporting our community's recovery from COVID-19. The construction of pop shops on Main began while applications for vendors were received and reviewed by Mercy Corps. And as a reminder, we have the ribbon cutting and the grand opening of those pop shops on Thursday this week. And finally, council's strive for environmental sustainability goal. One of the accomplishments in the third quarter was staff provided education and training to 14 businesses to increase food waste diversion, which is one of the focused programs for waste reduction this year. So that is it for my brief report, and happy to answer any council questions.
Thank you for your report. Lots of great work accomplished. Council Member McCullough.
Thank you. And I am very impressed with the progress of this report. I particularly like the DEI inclusion and that training for our staff. Also, I think all of it is very impressive, providing our safe and secure community. But my final question would be, what time on Thursday is the dedication for or ribbon cutting for our pop-ups?
I had to phone a friend real quick, 3 p.m. And those pop shops are located on the northeast corner of 522 and Bothell Way. So essentially in the parking lot adjacent to the Baskin and Robbins.
And we're very excited about this, so thank you.
Very excited and hope to see all the council and community members there. And hopefully we'll have a day like today and not a day like Monday.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
We're going to be singing Aaron's praises and for a little while yet, but I just want to say thank you. There's been a city to run, and you and the staff have done a terrific job, and council's very, very appreciative. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you very much. It's all the team that is holding me up. That is for certain. And thanks to all of you too.
All right, that was enough silence. Well, thank you very much. And as I said, and as you said, thank you for staff in the city, all the departments for doing all that they do in such challenging times, being remote, and for a good portion of them still coming in every day and still doing their job. So we appreciate that, and thank you for taking the time for this report to highlight all that has been accomplished. Work is still getting done. All right, so we have a council conversation, and then after that, we'll move into a closed session. But for now, let's kick off the council conversation with Council Member Dewar.
Thank you, Mayor. I have been thinking about this for a while. I had a community member make a suggestion, and given our proclamation at the beginning of this meeting, I'm wondering if we could look into potentially doing a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings. I think it would require some homework because I think the best way to have a proper land acknowledgement is to ask those that you're acknowledging. So we would need to do some outreach to the Duwamish tribe, which I'm told through the museum is the proper tribe to contact and acknowledge. But I was wondering if anyone else on council might be in support of something like that.
Councilmember Thompson.
Absolutely, completely in support. Yes. I had notes. There was one other thing, but I don't remember what it was. I might come back to it. But yes, I fully support the land acknowledgement. I would love to do that before our meetings.
Councilmember McNeil, your video, your background changed. Was that an attempt?
That was me trying to get back online. I'm having some serious technical difficulties. So thank you for acknowledging. Would it be okay if I talk now?
Yeah, please do.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you. So one of the interesting things that came up this week for me is the pot shops. And I had a very young person ask me a question about them and what they were all about. After I got done explaining what they were about, they asked me, well, can I have a shop there? And I'm like, well, I don't know the answer to that question. So I will definitely look into it for you. So it was interesting that young folks, young students would love to have an opportunity to be creative and have their own little business as well. So maybe it's something that look at in the future as a council on offering those opportunities to our young community members. And then secondly, the conversation around the work that's been done, looking at things through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, I think is amazing work that we're taking on. And I hope that we can, as a council and a city, take a look at how we can be more open and transparent, or how we can be open and transparent with the community on how we look at all decisions that we're making, and ensure that that process that we work so hard to go through is open to the public, so they can actually have the opportunity to see how we look at the decision-making processes that we're making. So I think it's amazing that we're doing. Hopefully we can wanted to for all of her work and everything she's doing. That we are looking and making decisions.
You were getting a little choppy there for the last portion of that, James.
All right. Well, hopefully you caught the intent that I was praising everybody for their hard work. So.
Deputy Mayor Zorns.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I was thinking about the comment about young people wanting to be part of the pop shops. And I know that there's, how old do you have to have a council member Dewar knows, because she's got a young hired. Do you have to be 16 years old now to be an employee? It used to be like 15 and a half. I don't remember. But something we, when we get to the Friday night market, is maybe we could have like, because a little craft area or place dedicated where our young people, under whatever that age is, can bring and sell their craft and wares. So anyway, it's just an idea.
Councilmember Thompson.
I absolutely love small retail spaces, and I wish we had a lot more of them. That business incubator type space that Councilmember McNeil and Councilmember Zorns mentioned. So I will just simply put in a plug for a market hall somewhere in Bothell, because that would be a whole bunch of that type of retail space. And man, I'd love to go there.
Councilmember McCullough.
First of all, I do want to say thank you to our economic development manager who started this pop-up shops. And hopefully we can extend them in the future. The first 4 are pretty exciting, and there's an opportunity to do more. So, I'm always very, very appreciative of having an economic development manager and seeing her help start new businesses, help us sustain the businesses we have. And this is pretty exciting for us just to start with 4 shops.
So Councilmember Dewar, I'll have to admit, I'm not familiar with a land acknowledgement. So I was kind of hoping someone else would weigh in and elaborate on it a little bit more, but I'm
Happy
not.
to explain it. Typically, it's done before a meeting to acknowledge that we're residing on the ancestral home of a acknowledged tribe from the area, and giving thanks and acknowledging that they've historically been displaced from the area that we're currently in, and just acknowledging that. I mean, a lot of what happens in a land acknowledgement was actually said in the proclamation that you read earlier this evening.
Mm-hmm.
It's just acknowledging that we're on the ancestral home of a tribe, and that land was stolen.
So yeah, I know the Landmark Preservation Board is working kind of on I forget the exact term, but the full story on Bothell. I wonder if they've already making some contacts with any of those groups.
I don't know that they have, but I talked to Margaret, who was at the time the president of the Bothell Historical Society, and she told me, to the best of her knowledge, it was the Snohomish tribe that is the acknowledged tribe that resided in this area.
Yeah, that's definitely what the proclamation said. So I'd be interested in finding out a little bit more, and I guess the crafting of that.
Yeah, I think an important piece is to ask the tribe, sort of working with them to craft the acknowledgement, not just to assume we know.
Yeah,
they would want to be said, and not speaking for them, but engaging in a conversation with them about what would be respectful to them. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. All right. Looks like everyone's raring to get on to the closed session here. So if nothing further, I will say that we will be moving on to our closed session for labor negotiation pursuant to RCW 42.30.140 parent 4 and parent 8. And it's anticipated to last 30 minutes with no action expected. So we'll adjourn from the closed session. All right, we'll see you over in the other meeting. Have a great night.